The knowledge we've gained from studying ancient collapses provides us with tools our predecessors lacked. By examining the patterns of systemic failure in Bronze Age societies, we can identify warning signs and potentially chart a different course for our own civilization. But possessing this historical insight and actually applying it represent two entirely different challenges. The archaeological record gives us a sobering view of what happens when complex systems fail. Bronze Age societies couldn't recognize how climate change, trade disruptions, and social tensions were creating a perfect storm of collapse triggers. Today, we have the archaeological evidence, historical records, and analytical tools to understand these complex failure mechanisms. The critical question is whether we'll use this knowledge to build more resilient systems or continue prioritizing efficiency at the expense of vulnerability. Systems designers and engineers have developed a concept particularly relevant to preventing catastrophic collapse, graceful failure. This approach recognizes that all systems will eventually face stresses beyond their design parameters. Rather than building systems that remain perfectly functional until they catastrophically fail, graceful failure means designing networks that can partially fail without complete collapse. Researchers like Thomas Homer Dixon and Joshua Hall have proposed energy return on investment, EROI, models suggesting a critical threshold around 3:1 as a measure of system resilience. Below this level, societies struggle to maintain complexity during crises. Consider modern electrical grids. Traditional centralized power systems can experience cascading failures where one problem triggers others until entire regions lose power. In contrast, more resilient grid designs incorporate microgrids, smaller, semi-autonomous systems that can disconnect from the main grid during disruptions and continue providing power locally. When part of the system fails, it fails gracefully without bringing down the entire network. This mirrors how some Bronze Age communities managed to survive while larger systems collapsed around them. Similar principles apply across multiple domains. Rather than relying on massive monoculture farms dependent on global supply chains, resilient food systems incorporate distributed local production alongside global networks. Companies are rethinking supply chains to include redundancies and alternative suppliers rather than maximizing efficiency through single-source relationships. These approaches sacrifice some efficiency for security, exactly the trade-off that many surviving Bronze Age communities made. Vulnerability assessments of modern nations reveal striking differences in resilience capacity. According to World Bank resilience reports, Japan consistently demonstrates high resilience despite facing frequent natural disasters. Its infrastructure incorporates redundant systems with backup power and transportation networks. Its disaster preparation protocols are comprehensive, and its social cohesion provides cultural resilience during crises. When the 2011 tsunami devastated coastal regions, these factors helped Japan recover without societal collapse. In contrast, nations like Saudi Arabia show concerning vulnerability patterns despite current wealth. Heavy reliance on a single resource, oil, limited agricultural capacity, water scarcity, and potential for social tensions create a vulnerability profile with uncomfortable parallels to Bronze Age states before their collapse. These assessments highlight how economic diversification, resource security, and social cohesion contribute to national resilience. Modern technological solutions offer tools for building resilience that Bronze Age societies couldn't imagine. Predictive modeling and early warning systems can help identify cascade failures before they become catastrophic. Climate models can project agricultural impacts decades ahead, allowing societies to adapt production methods and crop selections. Network analysis can identify critical nodes in supply chains where disruptions would cause maximum damage, enabling preventive strengthening. These technological approaches work alongside traditional resilience strategies. Just as some Bronze Age communities survived through water management and crop diversification, modern communities can build resilience through distributed energy production using renewable sources, local food systems that reduce transportation dependencies, and redundant supply chains that can adapt to disruptions. However, Technology alone won't prevent collapse if social factors aren't addressed. Archaeological evidence from the Bronze Age suggests internal conflicts contributed significantly to system breakdown. Similar patterns could emerge in modern societies where inequality creates tensions that resource scarcity might exacerbate. Building truly resilient systems requires addressing social vulnerabilities alongside technological and environmental ones. The parallel between Bronze Age palace economies and modern wealth concentration is particularly relevant. In both cases, concentrated resource control creates vulnerability during system stress. When Bronze Age palaces fell, the systems they controlled collapsed with them. Modern resilience requires more distributed resources and decision-making authority to prevent similar cascade failures when institutions face crisis. What's becoming increasingly clear is that civilization collapses aren't inevitable natural events, but preventable outcomes of system design choices. The Bronze Age collapse wasn't predetermined by drought or invasion alone, but by how those societies had structured their interdependencies and resource flows. Similarly, our modern vulnerabilities aren't fixed, but reflect specific choices about how we've designed our economic, political, and resource systems. This insight offers both warning and hope. Warning because it means we can't simply assume our technological advantages will protect us from systemic collapse. Hope because it means collapse isn't inevitable. It's preventable through intentional design for resilience and adaptation. The historical record shows that societies can adapt to even severe challenges when they incorporate resilience principles. The survivors of the Bronze Age collapse weren't necessarily the most technologically advanced or wealthy societies, but those with diversified resources, sustainable practices, and adaptable systems. These same principles remain relevant today, though the specific implementations differ. Building truly resilient modern systems requires a fundamental shift in thinking, from optimizing solely for short-term efficiency to balancing efficiency with long-term resilience. It means incorporating redundancies, creating diverse systems rather than monocultures, establishing feedback mechanisms that identify problems early, and designing for graceful rather than catastrophic failure. Yet when we look beyond the immediate devastation of the Bronze Age collapse, we discover something unexpected. From the ashes of this catastrophe emerged new forms of social organization, technological innovation, and cultural expression that would eventually transform human history. This raises a profound question about the nature of civilizational change itself. The cycle of civilization. Throughout history, societies have followed a recurring pattern that reveals a deeper truth about human civilization. After periods of collapse and darkness, renewal often follows, bringing innovations that transform the world in unexpected ways. This pattern of destruction and rebirth raises important questions about the fundamental nature of societal development. Is collapse always the end or sometimes a beginning? When we look at what followed the Bronze Age Dark Age, we discover something remarkable. After centuries of reduced complexity, population decline, and lost knowledge, the Mediterranean world experienced an extraordinary renaissance. From the ashes of collapsed Bronze Age societies emerged the classical world that gave us democracy, philosophy, and many foundations of modern thought. This pattern forces us to consider a provocative possibility. Perhaps collapse, while undeniably devastating for those who experience it, sometimes clears space for new forms of social organization and innovation that might not have emerged otherwise. The fall of rigid, centralized Bronze Age systems may have created openings for experimentation that weren't possible within the constraints of those earlier structures. The political innovations that emerged in the post-collapse Mediterranean world stand as perhaps the most significant example. Archaeological evidence from Disparities excavations shows that by the early 8th century BCE, following Dark Age recovery, Greek communities were already developing new political structures unlike anything in the Bronze Age. These early changes eventually led Athens to develop the world's first democratic system. This radical experiment in collective governance would have been unthinkable in the hierarchical palace societies of the Bronze Age, where power flowed from divine kings through carefully controlled bureaucracies. Similarly, Rome eventually developed its republican system, balancing power between different social classes and institutions in ways that Bronze Age societies never attempted. These new political forms weren't simply variations on earlier models, but fundamentally different approaches to organizing human communities. They emerged in a world where the rigid templates of Bronze Age governance had been wiped away, creating space for political experimentation. The spread of alphabetic writing illustrates another aspect of post-collapse innovation. The Phoenician alphabet, which survived the Bronze Age collapse when other writing systems disappeared, became extraordinarily influential during the recovery period. Archaeological evidence shows this alphabet was already in use in tablets from Ugarit by 1200 BCE and was refined in early Greek inscriptions by approximately 800 BCE. This writing system spread through Phoenician trading centers like Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre to communities throughout the Mediterranean. Unlike the complex Bronze Age writing systems that required years of specialized training and were limited to small scribe classes, alphabetic writing was relatively simple to learn and use. As Phoenician traders spread their alphabet throughout the Mediterranean, it was adopted and adapted by different cultures. The Greeks modified it to better represent their language, adding vowels to create the first true alphabet. This Greek adaptation then spread to the Etruscans and eventually to the Romans, evolving into the Latin alphabet we use today. This democratization writing, making it accessible to merchants, artisans, and eventually ordinary citizens rather than just specialized scribes, represented a profound shift in how knowledge could be recorded and shared. Iron technology, which flourished after the collapse, provides another example of post-collapse innovation. As we've seen, iron working gained prominence partly because bronze production faltered when trade networks collapsed. But over time, iron technology advanced far beyond simple substitution for bronze. Innovations in smelting and forging created tools superior to anything possible with bronze. These improved iron tools, particularly agricultural implements like plows, enabled farming innovations that eventually supported larger populations than had existed before the collapse. Iron's greater availability and the localized nature of its production meant more communities could access metal tools, spreading agricultural improvements more widely than had been possible under centralized Bronze Age systems. The decentralized political landscape that emerged after the collapse fostered competition and innovation between smaller political units. Without dominant empires imposing standardized approaches, communities developed diverse solutions to common problems. Greek city-states experimented with different governmental forms, from Spartan militarism to Athenian democracy. Phoenician trading cities developed new commercial practices. This diversity created a kind of natural laboratory for social and political innovation. This pattern of complexity, collapse, and renewal appears repeatedly throughout human history. The fall of the Western Roman Empire eventually led to the diverse innovations of medieval Europe. The collapse of China's Han Dynasty preceded the cultural flowering of the Tang. The Black Death, devastating as it was, helped clear feudal structures that had constrained European society, contributing to conditions that made the Renaissance possible. These historical cycles suggest something important about how human societies develop. Highly centralized, rigidly hierarchical systems eventually become brittle. They optimize for control and predictability at the expense of adaptability. When multiple stresses hit such systems simultaneously, they can experience catastrophic failure rather than gradual adaptation. But from these failures, more flexible and diverse forms of organization often emerge during recovery periods. This perspective gives us a more nuanced view of collapse. While we should never minimize the immense human suffering that accompanies societal breakdown, the lives lost, knowledge destroyed, and communities shattered, we can recognize that collapses aren't simply endpoints.